Hello, welcome to the first day of the 35th Annual Friends of Old Time Radio Convention here at the Ramada Plaza Hotel, formerly the Holiday Inn North, near Newark Liberty International Airport. Today is Thursday, I always get these dates mangled, October 21st, 2010. And since we are celebrating the golden age of radio, we'd like to remind you to please turn off all your cell phones and pagers and all sorts of anachronistic noise-making devices.
They didn't have those when we started.
No, they didn't. I have one now. I don't know how to work it, so if it goes off, I'll just answer it.
Everybody will have to forgive any obsequiousness that I might display in this because these guys are my idols, and many of you as well. These two gentlemen, Mr. Frank Buxton and Bill Owen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we like to celebrate the early days of the post-old-time radio era, fandom era, because a lot of people acknowledge that old-time radio ended on September 30th, 1962. That's up to debate. We could discuss that in a bit. And I think recently we've been losing a lot of the early historians and chroniclers. In recent months, we lost Jim Harmon. Within a 10-day period, Ron Lackman, and then we lost Charlie Stump shortly before the convention last year. And we also wanted to try to get John Dunning for this, but I got a nice email from his wife Helen, and he has health problems and he can't travel anymore. And I also wanted to try to get Richard Lemparski because he had old-time radio people in the earlier...
He's long gone, isn't he?
No, he's with us.
No, he lives in Santa Barbara.
Oh.
But he can't travel either, and I spoke to him on the phone, so... I think it was determined after Jim Harmon died, and we were talking about this on Old Time Radio Digest, which is maintained by our cameraman director, Charlie Summers.
Let's have a hand for Charlie.
And I was wondering, like, what was the first book? What was the first book of the post-era? And there had been radio books before. Irving Settle had a pictorial history of radio in the late 50s. Right. But, like, what was the first book to come out after, of the fan era? And Jim Harmon was 67, but then we did some checking, and the forerunner of the big broadcast, radio's golden age by you two gentlemen, I still have a price tag on it.
Who were those guys?
Here's a picture of the two of them when they were younger, and we found out that this was more than likely, and maybe arguably, the first book of its kind.
I think that's true, because I remember it all began, the genesis of it all, was on the Discovery Show. Frank was the star, the host, and I was the offstage announcer, and never seen, fortunately for the audience. But Virginia Gibson was his co-host, and they had these long periods in between, when you're taping a show, and we found that we had a common love for old-time radio, also movies and everything of that genre.
Yeah, we used to play nostalgia games. When the cameras broke down and that kind of thing.
One day something came up and we disagreed, not argued, we disagreed on to who was the announcer on the show. So I said, I'll look it up tomorrow. So I went down to the New York Public Library, probably the greatest of its kind in the world, went up the steps between the two lions. I'm sure somebody here knows the
I know
nicknames
this. I actually had a letter in the Daily News about a month ago about this.
The names of the two lions?
Muck and Meyer?
No. Anybody out there know? What are they?
Patience and fortitude.
Oh
They were originally named something, right? They were originally named after the two library founders. Leo Astor was one of them, and another gentleman whose name also was Leo. But Mayor LaGuardia
appropriate for lions, right? Both Leos, right?
Perfect. And Mayor LaGuardia decided he would nickname it, and it stuck. And anyway, I went into this great library in Manhattan, and went in and calmly asked the lady at the desk for her books on old-time radio. So she came back about 5 minutes later empty-handed. She said, there aren't any. I said, what do you mean there aren't any? She said, there's no books ever been written on radio. There were, as you mentioned, some individual books, Bob Hope,
right,
and Walter Winchell wrote their own viewpoint.
Mary Margaret McBride had several books.
But I was so shocked, and that was our cue. I came back and reported into Frank, and he said, well, let's do a little pamphlet. Maybe we can have a 16-page brochure listing who played Little Orphan Annie and who played Dick Tracy. That was how it all began.
That's true, absolutely true. And this I can tell you now, because it's, what's the date on that?
It's 66. This is.
66, so that's what, 12, 14 years ago? So much time has passed, we can tell this, right?
I think
That's
so.
self-published. Bill and I published it ourselves. We got it printed, we got it, we stored it in a storage facility.
Easton Valley Press.
That's a made-up name, that was us, that was just the two of us.
But Viking finally heard about the success
Yeah.
we had with it. And the real publisher grabbed hold of it. And from then on, it really took off.
Yeah, and then, as you probably know, Scarecrow Press redid it again about, 10 years ago, maybe?
At least.
About
About 10
96,
years, so-
97 maybe?
So
was-
the thing lives somehow or
How
other.
often do you guys get together? I mean, when was the last?
Every 2 decades.
Yeah,
So, I mean, you were here about 12, 15 years ago, the two of you.
that's the last time I saw Bill. was about
Wow, I mean,
Now, I
this is-
gotta tell Bill now, and you may be interested in this too, those of you who remember Discovery. I talked to Ginny about 2 months ago. Have you
good.
talked to her lately?
About 6 months ago. or
Yeah,
so,
she's still living in Manhattan and
Yes.
sounds fine. And, it was one of those phone calls. I had her telephone number from, 40 years ago, I guess. I just dialed it or punched it in or whatever you
still
do
works.
these days. Yeah. And she answered the phone. I said, Ginny, this is a voice from your past. She said, Frank.
Didn't miss a beat. Didn't
No?
miss a beat.
She's been waiting for you to call.
She has, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
she's still, her career is still going strong. If you tune in to the Turner Classic Movie Channel, you'll see her at least once a day because they show highlights of various films. And
Yes.
she's the girl in the green dress in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the light green. That's
Okay.
Virginia.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Buxton, during the
Yes, sir.
60s, you were quite busy with a lot of acting and voiceover work. Like Woody Allen's What's Up, Tiger Lily, you were one of the dubber voices for that.
Right.
And if
I
you-
was Phil Moskowitz, lovable rogue.
And if you're not familiar, it was a Japanese spy film, and then Woody Allen just had fun and erased the dialogue and translated it, and it was all about getting a secret recipe for
Egg salad.
right.
I was very impressed with Frank's connections. I'm a little kid from North Dakota, and I didn't know anybody or anything. And I called him one day to discuss the latest on our book. And he said, wait a minute, I got to answer the door. And Dick Cavett was at the door. I said, man, I'm in big-time company here. So I had to be on my best.
Now you were Chuck McCann's one of our favorite guests, and
Yep.
Unfortunately you were only here today, and too bad you can't have the two of you together on something. But you worked with him on a series of cartoons in the '60s, Batfink, was that right?
No, that was Len Maxwell was
Oh,
his
okay,
name.
I thought that was you. I'm
Chuck was simultaneous to doing Discovery. He was doing Laurel and Hardy and Chuck or
Right.
whatever on
And Little Orphan Annie with the
Yeah.
circles.
yeah on WABD. Do we all remember the Dumont Television Network?
Yeah, he's the one.
Dumont gets applause. That's great. No, but Chuck's had a number of puppets on his show, and the guy who did the puppets, whose name escapes me.
Paul Ashley.
Please,
Paul
yeah.
Ashley, wasn't it?
Paul Ashley, that sounds
Very
right,
good.
yeah. He did puppets of me and Ginny, and Chuck came on Discovery to operate the puppets. So that was the first time I had met him. I knew who he was, of course, from his own show. And actually, I see Chuck every year at REPS, which is the Radio Enthusiasts of Puget Sound, where Joy and I live up there in the Puget
Joy
Sound.
Jackson and,
Joy Jackson, yeah. And so I've seen Chuck a lot. Chuck a lot. That's a game. Out of Coney Island, you can play Chuck a lot.
To pick up on how the thing got started, where do you start? Because
Yeah.
there were no sources for us. And our fondest wish was that we would become a launching platform for others, and they would have some information. to
That is an
springboard.
understatement. That is an understatement.
Well, I
Don't you
guess it
think, gang?
started-
Don't you think?
It started quite a spate, and we're very happy with that. But we had nowhere to go except to what we thought were the sources. Fortunately for us, this was the 60s, and a lot of the people from that era were still around. They were beginning to age, many of them, and many we got to just the last year or two of their life. But we found out that actors, you'd think, well, you go to the guy who was the star on the show, would be a great source. In many cases, I think, Frank, you found this too, that I can't remember, was I on that show? I called Florence Freeman one day, a lady who was married to a rabbi, and she'd been a great actress in radio. She starred as young Widder Brown. As far as I know, she was the only one that played young Widder Brown. One of the biggest soap operas of all, ran almost 20 years. And I called her and I said, Miss Freeman, I want to get some information about your role in young Widder Brown. And she said, oh, I don't remember that program. She was so busy. She turned to her husband and said, honey, was I in a show called Young Witter Brown? I heard his voice in the background. Yeah, of course, you were the star. Oh, well, I really can't help you. And so we found that you go to the, it's understandable because these people like Bud Collyer, they were so busy, they would dart from studio, they'd hand them a script. Most of them were excused from rehearsals, they were so busy. Hand them a script and go to the next show, and they didn't even know what they were doing. And the directors...
Yeah, they frequently did it without a rehearsal.
Absolutely, if you were of that ilk, that level. But anyway, the directors and the writers, if we got to them, they could supply the sources.
Right.
And it was just incredible. We would open up... Sometimes you would hear them almost crying because they'd start reminiscing. It
Yeah.
wasn't that long,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Think about it. It was only about 15 years out of that age, but it seemed to them an
Yeah,
eternity.
by the time we wrote this book, radio was pretty much forgotten as a source of employment, certainly for them,
Yeah.
and also as an entertainment medium. I mean, it just disappeared.
Olin Soule, for one, who was one of the great actors on both radio and television, I sent him a copy of the manuscript to that point and asked him to fill in some other names if he knew anybody else was on such and such a show. And he said, he wrote me a letter. He said, I'm so angry at you, Mr. Owen. And I thought, oh, what have I done? And I read further in the letter, and he said, I came home from a Red Skelton TV show tonight, about 2 o'clock in the morning, dead tired, ready to hit the hay, and I opened this letter from you, and all these names came streaming out of the past. And he said, I was up all night working on your manuscript. So, and he happened to be, he was highly recommended because in every group, there's always one person that knows everybody and knows everything that's going on. You could call him a gossip maybe, but in this case, let's be kinder. He just knew everything that was going on in the industry. Olin Soule, most famous for First Nighter, of course, which when I was a little kid, I always thought it was First Snyder because I had neighbors whose name was Snyder. And I said, I want to hear First Snyder. And finally, when I became 19 or 20, I found out the answer to that. True. But it's just incredible, the memories that we evoked. And we were, as I say, so fortunate, the timing of this.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, as you mentioned, that we were able to start this thing, which wound up with some wonderful books, including my favorite, John Dunning's.
Oh.
John Dunning's
Tune
book.
In Yesterday.
Tune In Yesterday, which is...
Tune in yesterday, and the recent one was called On the Air. That was the update of it.
Right. So
You
we
just
were there.
triggered, finish your
ahead.
thought. You
No,
just triggered something. You might get a kick out of this. Mary Jane Higby, who was the star of When a Girl Marries. Remember, we did a couple of interviews with her.
Yeah, she was very nice.
Well, she was working on a book simultaneously, and she heard that I was working on one. Hers was just about that soap opera, yeah, When a Girl Marries. But she wanted to make references to other soaps along the way. And we were, I guess, both at about the same stage of production, which is a few months away. And she called me one day at ABC and said, Bill, I'm trying to think of the name of the announcer on such and such a show. And I said, I don't have my notes with me. I said, they're at home. She said, I really need it right now. And I said,
For pre-internet
listen,
days, you didn't have it at your disposal.
I said, my wife is at home. You can call her and ask her. And there's a big old boot box under the bed that's got all the information on it.
This is the way you write a book, folks.
Yeah,
You have
right.
a
And it
book
was
box
piled-
under the bed.
Right. And that's where all the notes were. And I said, it's all alphabetical, so just go to that. Sound very simple. She's, oh, thank you. You saved the day. So my wife knows nothing about this, and she answers the phone, and the woman says, this is Mary Jane Higby, Mrs. Owen. I need some information. Your husband, well, he's not here. I don't know anything about it. She said, oh, no. There's a box under your bed, and that's where all the information is. She said, I beg your pardon. But she did climb down and give the information.
I worked in the field of talking books for many years, and she and her husband Guy Sorrell were mainstays
Guy
at the American
Sorrell,
Foundation for
great
the
actor.
Blind, and I've heard stories about them. I came after they did, but I wanted to ask your own opinions about. We mentioned how September 30th, 1962 is the accepted date as the end of the era, and
Why?
But was it?
Why September, whatever you
Okay,
said?
I wanted to get your feelings on it. I mean,
What happened on that day?
that was the day that CBS canceled its last two shows,
okay.
Suspense and Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar.
Okay.
A friend of mine has a pop culture blog and historian, Steve Thompson, and he noticed that then the very next day, October 1st, 62, was the first day of Johnny Carson hosting The Tonight Show. And he thought that was like some sort of gateway because Carson was the exemplification of the TV era. But I wanted to get your opinion if you thought it ended 62. Some people say 72 when Arthur Godfrey gave up his daily show, and then there was all sorts
Well,
of...
you can't count radio out. We've still got Garrison Keillor. We've still got Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. We've still got the wonderful shows on PBS, This American Life, so forth, so forth. Those are real radio programs. We don't have a lot of real radio programs anymore, but it's still there if you search it out.
I was up in Canada a few years ago, and they were still going strong.
Oh,
Dramatic
Canada
programs.
and England, my
Yes.
God, the BBC.
They still got the Archers over in England.
Absolutely. I don't know why. Well, I do know why we gave it up, because television was much more exciting and much more interesting and much more money.
But this was another break we got because they attempted a revival in the early 60s. And Theater 5 was right in the basement of my building at ABC on 66th Street. And all these actors were down there. And such a coincidence. Here I am searching them out, and they're all there every morning. Bob Dryden, Stotts Cotsworth, all these people from the past, Vicky Vola. And I could get down there, and they were thrilled, of course, to give out the information and pick their brains. The hardest name in that book, nobody can ever appreciate it except Frank and myself. But we came to Mandrake the Magician, very obscure because it was mostly done by transcription. Raymond Edward Johnson, who used to come here quite often, a wonderful actor, was the star. And I got in touch with him, and he would write these long letters and name all the names and so on, people. And we couldn't find out who Narda was. Narda.
Oh, I remember, yes, yeah.
And we searched. There was no Google in those days, unfortunately. Nobody to turn to except Raymond Edward Johnson, and Juano Hernandez, I think, was gone by then. So finally, one day, he said, I thought of her name. It's Francesca Lenny. That's just 2 words in that little book. But to us, that means
That's gold.
wonderful.
Yeah, it was gold. It was like striking gold.
But
Oh, go ahead.
I just going to say the memories, we all have a radio. We all have a different look about it. But the fact that I can remember jokes, and I didn't write them down at the time, that I heard on the air 65 years ago.
Tell us one.
Well, for example, Bob Hope and Jerry Colonna one time. And Colonna with...
Can I do Kelowna?
Yeah. And he's... And,
Hello, Hope. This is Kelowna.
That's right. I said, what are you doing? What are you doing, Colonna? You're building a bridge from New York to London.
I'm building a bridge from New York to London.
Colonna, you can't build a bridge from New York to London.
I can't. Tear it down. Okay, boys, tear it down.
Or even a corny joke like Harold Teen, which came from some remote state. North Dakota didn't have any radio station. I had to put my ear up to the speaker to listen. Some faraway state, Kansas City or somewhere. Harold Teen was on the air. And anytime there was a comic strip on the air, that was extra exciting to me.
And I just
they said one
want
time-
to plug, we're having a comic strip old time radio panel tomorrow hosted by Maggie Thompson.
Oh, fantastic. But I remember one line from the show. He said, "Where were you bred, you crumb?" That's pretty corny.
When
I
you're
can't
10
forget it. I'm trying to forget it.
When you're 10 years old, that's hilarious. Or 80. It's also...
Now, do you have favorite shows that you, old-time favorite shows, or can you narrow it
My,
down to maybe 2 or 3?
I grew up with radio. I was born in 1930, so I lived through the great era of radio, and that was our form of entertainment, of course, at home. My favorites were the comedians. My all-time favorite is Fred Allen. I also love Jack Benny. Bob Hope, not so much. And, I've listened to some Bob Hope stuff over the years, in the past few years. His stuff was very ephemeral. I mean, it was so of the moment, and you go, he's talking about, references that we don't know who the hell they are today. For McGee and Molly, I think one of the best written things, but thank you. But my all-time favorite, and still my favorite, I still listen to it, is Vic and Sade.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought was one of the best written things I've ever heard, read, seen, whatever.
It was an afternoon show for the most part.
Afternoon show, 15 minutes. It was in that block of soap operas and kid serials, and all of a sudden this brilliant piece of Americana comes hurtling out of the loudspeaker, gentle, soft, and wonderful. And
Speaking of block, that was the opening, halfway up the next block.
Yes,
That's where Vic
yes,
was saying,
halfway up in the next block.
I guess from my viewpoint, you kind of named mine. You nailed it. Tuesday night was comedy night on
Yes.
NBC. And it was Fibber McGee came on, I believe, at 8:30 Central Time. And then came Bob Hope,
Right.
followed by Red Skelton, which
Right.
I wasn't old enough to stay up and listen to, but I cheated and listened by the door, put my ear to the keyhole and listened anyway. But what a lineup. But probably the most thrilling of all were the afternoon kid shows.
Yeah.
I mean, my heart was beating a mile a minute when the theme song for Little Orphan Annie came on. Who's that
Who's a little chatterbox,
Yeah.
the one with pretty auburn locks?
Oh, and-
Who can she be?
It's Little Orphan Annie. Isn't that great? And, of course, Don Winslow of the Navy.
Don Winslow of the Navy.
And there was the All-American boy.
Yes. Jack Armstrong, Jack Armstrong, Jack Armstrong, the all-American boy.
I had a great thrill because when I got to...
Damn, I'm good.
I got
Too
to-
bad there's no radio left. for
I
people
got to
like me.
I got to make the ABC announcing staff, which was quite a thrill and a pretty good accomplishment for, as I said, a little kid from
I
the
just want to
plains.
interrupt. We want to give a shout out to Bob Gibson, who also worked on ABC. He's in the front
Oh,
row.
absolutely,
right?
absolutely, Bob.
He was a page at, what, would Get the Message, was it, or Discovery?
Yours for a song and Discovery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to.
Come on up.
Yeah, get on the mic so they can hear you.
Bob Gibson, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention very briefly, I put my hand up before and then I realized this isn't going to work, so I shut up. When Bill was mentioning directors and producers and writers, he also had, and timing is everything, the good fortune, and it's documented at least in one of his books, and I have more than one, he had the good fortune of talking to his colleagues, some of whom went way back. And of course, when you mentioned Florence Freeman, my head immediately said, George Ensbro.
He was the announcer.
He was the only announcer, I think, on
He set
Young
the
Winter.
record for something like 17, 18 years.
And wasn't he? Didn't he work for NBC Blue and then ABC for like a total
Yeah,
of like
some of the announcers,
65, 70,
They were
75?
given a choice in those days when they broke up. And they were given a choice. Do you want to go with the new network, ABC, or stay with the old? And Jack Costello, for example, Ben Grauer stayed with the old. Milton Cross. and-
Which became NBC.
Yeah, exactly. ABC.
Don
ABC,
Gardner.
ABC,
yes.
right. But I was starting to tell you about Doug Browning. I was thrilled to find that he's on the staff. I'm a peer. I'm his equal, supposedly. Not in my mind, I wasn't, but it was thrilling. Well, to back up a second, the first time I met Milton Cross, I was so honored, to be on the staff with him. And I kept calling him Mr. Cross. He said, Bill, you don't have to call me Mr. Cross. You can call me Milton. Oh, thank you, Mr. Cross. that was all. But Doug Browning was the announcer on Terry and the Pirates, which I listened to when I was a little kid, literally. And they started with those wonderful Quaker puffed wheat commercials, shot from guns. And I never did figure out why it's better if it's shot from guns. But anyway, he would come on, and you'd hear a Chinese gong. Gong, and then you'd hear... Exactly. So here's my chance. I said, Doug, what does that mean? And he laughed, and he said, one day, for a gag, he started chattering nonsense syllables, wong, 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 and the guy in the audience thought he spoke Chinese. That's great. The guy from the agency, the rep, said, keep that in. What did you say? He said, I don't know what I said. But that was forever on. So each day he made up some little nonsense.
Bill's been talking about his early days in radio. When I was a kid, I grew up in Larchmont, out in the suburbs here. So New York was my playground, and New York City, was my playground. So where my dad worked, he commuted into town.
What did your dad do?
My dad was in the coffee business for the A&P, Red Circle, 8 o'clock, and Bocar. He was the advertising guy for that. So, of course, we got to see a whole lot of stuff. Kate Smith, he sponsored Kate Smith, and, we could get tickets for anything. It was great. So, in any event, Let's Pretend was on Saturday morning. Nyla Mack's wonderful Let's Pretend. And I listened to it and I said, I want to be on the radio. I want to do that. So I wrote a letter to Nyla Mack saying I'm 9 years old or whatever I was, and I would very much like to be on the... Never heard a word, of course. And of course, later I found out, much to my, not surprise necessarily, that all the kids on there were professionals. They all were regular radio actors who went to, what was the high school?
Special school, yeah.
Yeah, they went to the high school for performing arts or something here, and so they were all pro. So she wasn't about to, hire some kid from Larchmont who wanted to be on the radio.
I think my favorite story, the stories are just flowing back now.
Yeah, me
Hope
too.
we have time for them. But my favorite story, there was a gospel singer, I won't give his name because his descendants might sue me for telling you this, but he was noted for imbibing. And unfortunately, he often did it. He was on Saturday mornings on the network, and he often did it just before air. And people were always nervous. They say, one of these days, you're going to have a problem. But he could get through it. He was a real trooper, and he got through it. But one day, he totally crashed on the air. He was singing the old Rugged Cross, and just they had to come in with organ music. They had to haul him out, and everybody said, "Well, that's the end of his career." No, he started getting letters over the weekend saying how wonderful he was, so overcome by emotion he couldn't.
That was the joy of radio, was anything could happen, and you believed it. The pictures were in your mind.
Well, they also played a lot of tricks. And as an announcer, I never appreciated it. I didn't think it was funny to set a script on fire, but somebody would or give you a hot foot or something. But Frank Singheiser was the victim of a cruel hoax one time. He was working then for Mutual. I think he did at NBC for a while. A very well-known newscaster. He prided himself on never rehearsing the news. He wanted that fresh feel, and he would refuse to look at the script.
Dangerous.
Very dangerous. Well, one day they decided they'd get him. So they handed him the script. The light comes on, he's reading, and he gets to a point. And today, Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek was quoted as saying, it was all Chinese.
Mr. Gibson, Mr. Owen, you were with WABC when they had the All-Americans?
I had no other than to do some visiting when I was a kid, or a page, if you will. I had no involvement with the local station.
Oh, okay.
I worked for the radio network, where I had the pleasure of encountering my first day back after being away for 12 years, Bill Owen and Don Gardner. And I said, hell, I'm right at home.
All-Americans, were you with there, Bill?
I remember them well, absolutely.
Bill?
Well, the Swingin' Seven was something I fell into. I had been in Cincinnati. I always liked popular music, but I also was knowledgeable on opera. And the opportunity in Cincinnati is a very cultured city, as many of you know. And they have opera there regularly. And I was chosen to be the opera announcer. And I've read up even more feverishly. And I got to know the plots and the characters and so on. Not like Tony Randall did. But anyway, I was pretty good at that. And I came to New York, and I was filling in late one night. And that was when they were just making the transition from nothing. They said the ratings were one notch above police calls. So they had to do something with the format. So they decided to go all rock. I particularly did not like rock music. I was never a fan of Elvis or the Beatles or any of those people. But they said the way I gave the news one night, they said, that's the style we're looking for. And Hal Neal was changing the station format. And he said, I'd like you to be on our group. We're bringing Scott Muni and Herb Oscar Anderson and various people over. And I said, I won't fit. I said, I'm classical music. He said, no, you'll be perfect. So they put me in with this group, and I had to do things that I crossed my fingers when I said, here's a great song, number 44 on the charts this week. Let's hear it for, that wasn't me, but they liked the way I did it. And so I got all kinds of publicity. And to this day, ironically, if I'm remembered for one thing in the industry, people remember me as the original disc jockey for the rock and roll music.
Oh, my God.
And Bill, there is pictorial evidence, as you well know, of one of those shots taken in, I think it's Radio City, but I wouldn't swear to it, with you and the other 6 swinging gentlemen. It would have been 60, 61.
Yeah, exactly.
Just before Discovery,
And it was,
right?
and it appears every so often on Alan Sniffin's New York radio message board.
The only survivors that we know of, I know 3 have passed away. We don't know what happened to Farrell Smith. Herb Oscar Anderson is retired, living in Florida. And Chuck Dunaway is going to be at the convention this week. He's coming up from Texas just to watch the convention.
Who are the others?
Well, Jack Carney passed away. Let's see. Scott Muni.
Yeah.
Who else?
Marshank? Len Marshak? No.
Charlie Greer.
Charlie Greer, yes.
He has been here in the past, yeah.
He's
Yeah.
passed on, hasn't he?
Yes, he
Yeah,
passed
right,
on,
yeah.
but he has come here. But it is a little ironic that that's what I'm remembered for.
Yes.
I have one more question before we open up for questions from the audience. And a gentleman sitting in the front row is Gary Yagi, an historian. And several years ago, Gary, he recounted the top 10 old-time radio moments, the 10 greatest things in the old-time radio. And the number one, which most historians and most scholars agree on, would be Orson Welles' War of the Worlds.
Right.
Do you gentlemen have any insights on that? And
Well, I do in one regard. When we came to having someone write a foreword we couldn't afford the foreword for our self-published version, but when Viking said, we'd like somebody that can write you a nice foreword, he was the first name that popped into my head. We wanted somebody who was universally famous and was known for having worked in radio, known by that audience, and also by younger people. And we thought Orson Welles, everybody's heard of him. They said, Orson Welles, if you get him, he'll want 90% of the royalties if you can find him on his yacht in the Mediterranean. So,
And if you can get him into a recording studio.
so we skipped him. The
Sober.
next choice was Agnes Moorehead. So I wrote her a letter, and I said, she fits the bill perfectly. Everybody knows her. She was busy with
that
Bewitched
was
at
that was
time.
another one of Professor Yagi's top 10. Sorry, wrong number.
Sorry,
Oh,
wrong number,
well,
right.
there
Tour
you
de
go.
force.
We're tying it up very nicely. She wrote me a very nice letter. She said, I'm honored that you requested. She says, I really don't know how to write. She meant not this way, but she didn't know how to write for publication. So then we thought of other names. Edgar Bergen might work. And then the perfect name, I can't remember which it was thought of at first, but Henry Morgan.
Henry Morgan, yeah.
You couldn't have asked for a better forward. It's the best part of the book.
Yeah, it really is quite entertaining. If among the top 10 is Oh, the Humanity, is that among the top 10?
The Hindenburg
The
Call,
Hindenburg?
yes.
Good.
I was very humbled. I was 26 years old, a staff announcer at WLW in Cincinnati, and Herbert Morrison came in looking for a job.
Oh, my God.
And I thought, why don't they fire me and hire him?
Yeah.
But they said, no, there's no vacancy right now. That said something to me, how lucky I was.
Both Joy and I can attest to the fact that the War of the Worlds holds up to this day. She's done a recreation of it, and I did it. I live on an island in the Puget Sound, ferry ride away from Seattle. And on 1998, which was the 60th anniversary, was it? Am I getting my dates right?
Yeah, 38 is
Yeah,
right.
October
on
30th.
Halloween, we did a recreation.
Night before Halloween.
Night before Halloween, yes.
Right.
We did a recreation of War of the Worlds, and I rewrote it so the monsters, the Martians, landed on Bainbridge Island, where I live, and waded across to Seattle. So I was able to incorporate all of the, I went back in the old newspapers and found a place where they could have landed on Bainbridge, so forth and so forth. And playing, I had a wonderful guy doing the Orson Welles part who sounded so much like Orson Welles. Mike McLaughlin, you know Mike? A great, wonderful voice, perfect voice. So much so like Orson Welles that somebody came up to him afterwards and says, your lip syncing was absolutely perfect. And it was his voice. But the person who played the scientist,
No, Professor Pearson.
Professor Pearson, was Russell Johnson, who was
A professor.
the professor on Gilligan's Island, and he lives on Bainbridge Island. Russell Johnson lives on an island. Okay?
Unbelievable. What are some of the other programs? I can't think of any others.
Mr.
offhand.
Yaki, can you take
Yeah.
the mic? Tell us what your top 10 was.
I can't remember them all off the top of my head.
I think you had the
Your Money or
Amos,
Your Money or
in
Your
Your
Life?
Life.
Yeah, that
Amos,
must be
Amos Andy, Amos Andy
Yeah.
Christmas
Oh, yeah.
show. The Hindenburg Call. Sorry, wrong number. FDR's funeral with Arthur Godfrey. Was that on the list?
That wasn't on my list.
No. Okay. War of the Worlds, of course. That's 6 of them. So
It was in this very room, and this probably the same table a few years ago. We had a Jack Benny panel,
Right.
and they explained that Your Money or Your Life actually was not the longest running gag.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Reaction.
apocryphal.
But Jack
certainly.
Benny let it go because it was become
Great story.
a legend. The actual one wasn't that funny. That got for
I think it was
40
Mary
seconds.
Livingston just telling him to shut up.
Exactly. They had
And it wasn't,
Metropolitan Opera star was with them.
Captain
and it
Cornell.
wasn't the actor who became a producer.
Sheldon
It
Leonard.
wasn't Sheldon
Eddie Marr,
Leonard. It was
was it?
Eddie Marr, yes, exactly.
Isn't that
Yeah.
how that has become mythical?
Well,
But
that's okay.
But it was Don Wilson was at the microphone with this singer from the Metropolitan Opera, and he knows everything about opera, much to Jack Benny's dismay, and he wants to get in the conversation. And he says, well, and they just go on and on. Oh, yes, Act 3 of Traviata, that's where such and such at. And he's so envious of Wilson's knowledge, and he's standing at the other microphone with Mary, and finally he tries to break in, and he says, well, I think, and she says, oh, shut up! That isn't really that funny, but
Yeah.
it was the timing, which was his forte anyway.
Questions from the audience, anybody? Right in the front, Steve, I'm sorry.
You've got a clip up there.
Okay,
Well,
I'll tell you about it. Can I tell you about it?
Go for it, and one person.
Okay, because Mr. Owen has to leave early to be in the rehearsal, I was figuring we were going to end with like the last part of this Odd
Well-
Couple episode, which was written and produced by...
Written and directed.
Directed by Mr. Buxton here.
We did a thing called The Big Broadcast. Tony loved old radio, and so I was on the staff for The Odd Couple, producing it, writing it, directing it, so forth. And I wrote a script, which they loved. And if you get the box set of The Odd Couple, I think it's on the 3rd season, not sure. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's Tony and Jack, right?
Yeah.
And Al Molinaro over there was Murray the cop. I can't remember exactly where we are in the middle of the adventure, but it supposedly Tony said that supposedly one time when he was in radio, the sound effects man was supposed to hit a gong for a particular cue and somehow forgot to do it. So one of the actors took off his shoe and threw it at the gong. So that's in this episode also.
A lot of people are surprised to know that Tony was a secondary version
Jack,
of I
Doc,
Love a
and Reggie.
Mystery.
Yeah, he was Doc, right? No, Jack. Yeah, Doc. He was the Englishman. Reggie. He was Reggie.
Reggie, he was
yeah,
Reggie.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen because many, many years ago I purchased your book. And on page 232 of your book, I came across this program called Meyer the Buyer.
Charles, we are talking to Charles Nyron, the world's leading authority on the comic strip and the radio version of Meyer the Buyer.
And that set me off for about a 10-year quest trying to find something about that show.
By Harry Hirschfield, right?
Very early.
Yeah.
People at the Kentuckiana Radio
Oh.
the club I belong to helped me out.
You know, we talk about the famous shows, but
Found
it's
the comic,
Yeah.
my.
Great.
play a comic,
Great.
and then it went to a radio show picked up by CBS. I could actually make a log because I have a description of the show.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to give you the push.
I just want to thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, well...
There's a question back there.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, you did the Discovery Show, which I saw as a little girl.
How nice.
An episode that you did on the 9 planets, and I remember them saying, or you and Virginia, I guess, about if you set your sandwich down on Pluto, it instantly turned to ice, and that stuck with me all these years. It's something that I just blew me away. But also, also there was a Jack Benny situation from January 8th, 1950, where in the Romanoff, where Jack Benny is supposed to be the longest laugh. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, the original, the supposedly longest laugh is when a tough guy accosts Jack Benny on the street and says, your money or your life, and then there's a laugh and it builds and builds.
Big pause,
and builds.
yeah.
And he says, well, and he says, I'm thinking it over. Yeah.
But this one was about Romanoff, and Jack Benny broke up, in fact, and so it was a very long laugh because he was busy rolling on the floor.
He was an easy laugher, Jack. He
I think
loved
one
it.
of the great moments on Jack Benny and Fred Allen when they would get together,
Mm.
of course, a lot of listeners thought they really hated each other, which was wonderful, the illusion.
Yeah, it
But
worked.
they actually had a boxing match one time, supposedly outside the Hotel Pierre. But one time, of course, the story was that Benny was most famous for having his writers, and Alan was quick to ad lib. And he would get away with murder. And one time he insulted Jack Benny, and Jack couldn't think of a quip to come back with.
Yeah.
So he said, "You wouldn't get away with that if my writers were here."
I wanted to ask you, Mr. Owen, about this novel you wrote called DJ.
Oh, yeah.
Very kind of salacious for its time.
Well, this was a book.
You and a fellow named Alan Jeffries.
Right, right. This was an idea we got. It was based on the change that happened at ABC. It was kind of a satire when they went to rock and roll, as we mentioned before. And just this story did very well. It was #1 in Detroit for a while.
The
I
book?
remember- yeah, I remember you
Great.
said you saw it all over in L.A.
Yeah, I
at the
saw.
time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But my wife
good for
didn't
you.
like some of the portions of the book.
No, I wanted to get a copy to hold up, but it's very expensive on eBay.
Yeah, exactly. I probably have some.
And what are you gentlemen doing right now? You have any plans, or how?
You wanna go
I know,
first,
I
or-
know you could defer
Go
to
ahead.
the Dunning book, and you may not have seen a need to want to revisit and make a bigger broadcast, an update. But any other writing projects or anything else?
Shall I start, or do you want to
Go
start?
ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm busier now than I think I've ever been in my life, practically, and I can't believe it. It's a great blessing to have lots to do when you're my age. Books, yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm having a publishers conference this evening, a dinner thing. I'm a big fan of silent films, and I have a very long interest in silent film preview slides. In the old days of the silent film, they would put a slide on to preview the next thing. They're collector's items now, and I have a whole bunch of them. And a friend of mine and I are coming out with I hesitate to say coffee table book, because that's kind of a dismissive thing. But we're coming out with a book on silent movie slides. It's going to be very interesting. I am regularly appearing on the internet on an internet sitcom called Cookus Interruptus. Aha! You talk about salacious. No. What it is, it's a wonderful cooking show. It's only like 4 or 5 minutes, where this wonderful woman does recipes that are good for you, and we are her family, and we obviously interrupt her in the middle of her recipes. The recipe's the star, and you can certainly do all the cooking from those. I play the grandfather, typecasting. Last week I did another of Jim French's mystery, you know about Jim
Imagination
French?
Theater?
Imagination Theater, yes, he's still doing them. We did a Halloween show, me and Larry Albert, who probably has been here at one time or another. We did another one of those. And just recently this summer, I got 4 chickens
4 chickens.
to occupy my time, yes, to keep me busy.
To back up what he said about staying busy, I don't know if you know Michelangelo's prayer, but I think it's one of the most beautiful things on earth. God grant me that I have more to do than I can ever possibly finish.
Yes.
So many of us feel the opposite, but if you get right down to it. What have I been doing in recent years? I've written a couple of books. I know a lot of you people are familiar with them. The Over 60 Trivia book, which you're most all too young for here. And all those things my teacher never told me. Bob has seen them. Could you put in a good word for those books? Are they interesting?
I think they're very interesting, and I
got
have to contradict you. I'm definitely old enough to relate to
Oh.
the red one.
I
The
just
Red Network book, Over 60.
I have
yes.
another trivia book this size coming out. Should be out sometime next month.
who's the publisher? Those Bear Manor books, or no?
Publisher called St. Johann Press.
Oh, St. Johann,
Yeah.
okay. And we, sometime over the weekend, we have this copy of Radio's Golden Age. It's just a little frayed on the dust jacket, but otherwise it's a solid. The spine hasn't even been broken, and it's just been signed just recently by Mr. Buxton and Mr. Owen. We're going to have this auctioned off either later today or...
Hundreds of thousands of dollars it goes for.
And if any of you
Or-
are interested in these books,
Yeah, he's-
I will be happy to autograph them for you.
He's got a garage full of those. I've got a garage full of those. So
Okay. All right,
These
so
are available.
we want to end a little early because Mr. Owen is going to be needed in a rehearsal, and we want to play like the last 8 minutes or so of
They
The
can
Odd
wait.
Couple that Mr. Buxton wrote. But I just wanted to make sure that because you guys wrote a book where you wanted to credit everybody, I wanted to say that this has been a copyrighted feature of the Friends of Old Time Radio. Jay Hickerson, founder, president, and fearless leader. Our producers, Fred Burney, director and cameraman Charlie Summers, publicity Sean Doherty for WBAI FM radio, Max Schmid for Yesterday USA, Professor Michael Beal and his lovely daughter Leah Beal, and for those were the days players, WDCB FM in Chicago, we got Steve Darnall. And Radio Spirits, Mark Tepper, and I just wanted to give a shout out to various people who are here and might want to co-opt this and broadcast it, this interview on their various shows that celebrate old time radio.
No gaffers, no grips, no best boys, no makeup, no music credits, no.
We talked about all the famous shows.
Get gowns by Bob Mackey, okay?
We talked about the famous shows, but it's a thrill to think of that we rescued some of the really, really obscure programs. One that comes to mind,
Meyer the Buyer?
possible nobody out there has ever heard of it, the Johnson family.
The
Anybody
Johnson
remember?
family, yes.
You remember down Chickazola, way down south? Jimmy Scribner did all the voices. It came on Mutual afternoons. I figure I was the only one in the world that ever heard it. I've never met anybody that's heard of it before, but it's in the book also.
Mm-hmm. It was on You Asked For It.
It was on You Asked For It?
You asked for it.
Oh, very
Oh,
good.
really?
The Johnson family?
Well,
Asked Scribner to perform.
Yeah, he did all the voices.
we could dig deep into the voice actors, the people like.
I was going to say, until I researched, I always thought that Tommy Riggs and Betty Lou, always thought of him as a ventriloquist, a la Edgar Bergen, Charlie. It turns out there was no Betty Lou.
There was
That
no,
just
no
a voice.
dummy. No dummy. It just did a different voice. Then there was Marlon Hurt, who played the part of a African American maid.
That shocked
of all
the
things.
audience. I was
a
in the
man, a white man.
I was in
Get
the
out.
audience when they introduced the actors one at a time, and the audience would.
Yes.
They were shocked.
And
Thank you for your book.
This is,
are you cutting us off now? Is that?
don't, all right, we still have.
He wants to see the
still have
video.
it's just
I want to be sure we see this.
all right. So, well, I wanted to thank Bob Gibson for stepping
Thank
in.
you.
And,
The
and
part of the interloper was played by me.
And I give you the incomparable, I can't say enough good things about them, Mr. Frank Buxton and Mr. Bill Owen, right?
Thank you.
I'd like to echo that.
We want to, since Bill is needed in a rehearsal right away, we want to have the audience refrain from accosting him for autographs. We can get the autographs later, okay?
Okay, very good.
Right, thank you, gentlemen.
www.frankbuxton.com.
Very good. And our next segment coming up will be an authors panel hosted by Mel Simons from WBZ Radio in Boston. And I want to thank you, gentlemen. And we're going to any other setup we need for this Odd Couple episode?
No, they're about to do. There's of course, a lot of pre-story to this, but this is, I presume, you're at the point where they're
just
about to do the broadcast itself.
Well, the
It's
idea-
sort of a Babe Ruth story, baseball.
Okay.
Bill, I'll see you later.
Okay, very good, guys. Once again, give it up for Mr. Buxton, Mr. Owen, Mr. Gibson, and Charlie Summers on the camera. And here it is, the Odd Couple from 73, 74, was this?
I don't know.
Okay, here we go. We need some help, Charlie. It's not happening.
It's going frame for frame.
Boy, slow motion.
Okay. Oh, I got it.
You know what you're doing. You got all your music, Mark? Felix? Yes. I just read your script. I mean, this isn't the story about Babe Ruth and the kid. The names are wrong. The places are wrong. It's not the way it happened.
But it's better than the way it happened. This is dramatization based on rumor.
Madison,
This script is going out over the air?
well, it's a new concept.
New concept? This is what killed radio. We're gonna light up your switchboard.
This is gonna make you the hero of broadcasting.
Who are these people? This is my cast.
Well, I hope they're members of the union. If they're not, they can't perform.
What kind of bilge water are you pumping, mister? Don't worry, kids. He can't do anything to us.
I'm sorry, it's union rules.
Union? You say union? You want to see a union card? I'll show you a union card. What does that look like?
That is a union card.
You're darn right.
All right, you're all right, but these two will have to go.
Sorry, kids. It's radio. Showbiz. Better luck next time. You see how smart I was to pay my dues?
Felix, this was written for 4 people.
So what's the difference? This is radio. We'll double. That's radio. That's the beauty part. Okay, everybody set? Cast?
We're the cast.
Right. Sound effects. Music.
Okay.
What's that?
What's what?
That wheeze.
Oh, nothing. It's a smoker's cough.
1 minute to go, Oscar.
You gonna be all right?
This coffee's got
I'll put it out. I'll be all right. Sure. Okay, sure. Okay, let's go. Here.
Get him out of here. The guy's gonna ruin our show.
Would you mind waiting outside till this is over, sir?
Do I get paid?
Yes, you'll be paid double. Just You know what to do. You watch the sound effects. You'll do the same.
But I'm the narrator.
It's a small part. You'll do it.
Oh, I noticed that.
All right, Sega. All right, everybody, cup your ears. Hello, sports fans, and welcome to the new Oscar Madison Show. Great moments in sports. Felix Unger, your host. Right now, the star of our show, the Dean of America's Sports Writers, Oscar Madison, your host, is Felix Unger.
Thank you. Let's get right to our story. The year 1932.
Extra, extra! President Roosevelt elected president!
The place, Chicago. The Windy City. Babe Ruth, then playing for the Yankees, was looking forward to that afternoon's World Series game with the Cubs. The morning of the game, as was his wont, he visited the children's ward of Mercy Hospital.
Dr. Churn, call surgery. Dr. Churn, call surgery. And now, the babe speaks.
Gee, nurse, it sure is swell to see all those poor kids in the hospital looking so perky.
It's you that makes them feel perky, Baby Ruth. You're a peachy guy.
Ah, you're a grand girl to say that. I'm just glad the good Lord allows me to be here. Ah, look, here comes the doctor. Hello, doctor.
Say, hello. I think I'll stop walking now. I'm glad I caught you before you went out to Wrigley Field, Bambino.
Oh, something I can do for you, doctor?
There's just one child who hasn't seen you, and it'll break his little heart if we don't stop by.
Oh, sure is shooting. Always time for a kid in trouble.
Right this way, immortal babe.
And so, fate played a hand that afternoon in Chicago. As they approached the bedside of poor little Billy, who was ill with a rare tropical disease for which there was no cure, he was sobbing quietly. The nurse spoke softly. The child stopped crying when the nurse spoke softly.
Little Billy? Yes? The immortal babe is here to see you. Mr. Ruth.
Oh, just call me babe.
Oh, gee, Willikers. The great Bandito is here.
That's Bambino.
It sure is nice to see you.
Hey, kid, you got a radio?
Yeah, it's a key one. It doesn't get any static.
Well, you'll be listening to the ball game this afternoon, and when the announcer tells you I'm up to bat, I'm gonna point to a spot in right field grandstands and hit a home run right into that spot, and it's gonna be just for you, little Billy.
Beat on spot score. Get it right here. Ice gold. Beer, beat on spot score.
Later that day at the stadium.
Well, fans, it's top of the 8th here at Wrigley Field. The bases are loaded. The babe steps up to the plate. A hush falls over the crowd. Wait a minute. What's going on here? The immortal babe is pointing to the right field bleachers, and I'll bet it means something to somebody, somewhere. Consuela gets a signal again. There's the wind-up and the swing. It's going right to the spot where the babe pointed. Oh, and listen to that crowd roar. Even the dogs were cheering. you in just a minute.
Great! Oh, that's great. Look at the board. Look the way that board's lit up. It's like a Christmas tree. You're doing great. Now, just keep the energy up. Listen, you better look over the ending because I rewrote it.
What was my the ending?
Ready? Yes,
Here we go. What?
Go. And now, this is Felix Unger, and back to Oscar Madison's exceptionally great moments in sports.
Well, folks, Babe Ruth went on to fulfill his destiny and many more great moments in baseball, but poor little Billy got sicker and sicker until finally one day, when it looked like the end was near, in far-off England in a tiny laboratory, a miracle took place.
I say, Dr. Margolis, I think I've done it. What's that, Dr. Fleming? I've discovered penicillin.
Yes, folks, penicillin, the big P. The drug that cured the rare disease of little Billy Pomerantz and millions more like him.
Felix Unger here, and as an interesting footnote, you might like to know that Billy Pomerantz lives today quietly in a condominium in Iron Mountain, Michigan. The successful head of the Pomerantz Joke and Novelty Company, makers of the world-famous Pomerantz Joybuster. This is Felix Unger reminding you to tune in tomorrow for Oscar Madison's great moments in sports. This is Felix Unger, your host.
Well, they got hundreds of calls.
No kidding, isn't that great?
Correcting the story.
Well, that doesn't matter. What do they think about it in the front office? That's what
Oh,
counts.
they love it. They're going to keep it as a regular feature.
No kidding.
Only they're going to use professional actors. We're out.
I'm a professional actor. What are you talking about? I'm a member of the union. Oh, come on, don't do that! I can't act in radio without that.
Thank you. That was Mr. Buxton. I'm Derek Tague. Thanks for coming out. The authors with Mel Simon's coming out. Any final words on that?
That was
Steve?
damn funny. I haven't seen it in years.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming out. Okay, good night.
Thank you.